The Veltrax Imperial Combat Academy occupied an entire moon. Not a small moon either. One of those proper moons with its own weather patterns, 3 distinct biomes, and enough gravitational pull to make visiting dignitaries from low-grav worlds immediately regret their breakfast choices. The Academy had been training the galaxy's elite warriors for 17,000 standard cycles, which was an impressively long time to maintain any institution, let alone one dedicated to teaching young beings how to efficiently render each other unconscious. The Academy's reputation rested on a simple premise. If you could survive training here, you could survive anything the galaxy threw at you. Their graduates commanded fleets, led ground invasions, and served as personal guards to the Galactic Council's most paranoid members. The entrance examination had a mortality rate that would make a health and safety inspector weep into their compliance documentation. Naturally, when humanity applied for admission to the Academy, the response was somewhere between polite confusion and outright laughter. Humans, after all, were the newest species to stumble into galactic society, and their credentials were not impressive. They hailed from a planet that barely qualified as habitable by civilized standards. Earth, a death world that apparently spent most of its geological history trying to kill everything living on it through various creative methods, including ice ages, meteor strikes, supervolcanoes, and an atmosphere composition that had changed its mind about what gases to include roughly 17 times. The fact that anything evolved there at all was considered something of a cosmic joke. The humans themselves seemed pleasant enough, if distressingly fragile. They lacked the armored carapaces of the Veltrax, the regenerative abilities of the Kronith, the size and strength of the Krathen, or frankly, any notable physical advantages whatsoever. They were soft, squishy, relatively weak, and died if you looked at them wrong. Their bones broke, their skin tore, and they had the gall to house all their vital organs in easily accessible locations with minimal protection. The Galactic Council had admitted them anyway, mostly out of a sense of civic duty and because the humans had discovered faster-than-light travel on their own, which meant they were at least marginally intelligent, even if they were built like particularly vulnerable fruit. The Academy followed suit, accepting human cadets, and even, in a move that caused several senior instructors to submit formal complaints, a human instructor. That instructor's name was Mara Chen, and she had been teaching basic hand-to-hand combat theory for 2 standard cycles. Theory, not practice. Theory. The kind of classes where you discussed leverage points and momentum transfer while everyone tried not to think too hard about how the instructor would probably shatter like dropped pottery if any of the larger species sneezed too aggressively in her direction. Mara taught her classes with a pleasant demeanor and unsettling calm that the other instructors found vaguely unnerving but couldn't quite articulate why. She was assigned the smallest training room, the one usually reserved for meditation and conflict resolution seminars. She never complained. She showed up precisely on time, taught her material with competence, and then disappeared into her quarters where she presumably did whatever fragile humans did in their spare time. Knitting, perhaps, or cataloging anxieties. The real combat training, of course, was handled by proper instructors. Beings like Kara Vex, a Veltrax warrior with 6 articulated limbs, chitin plating that could deflect small arms fire, and a teaching philosophy best summarized as, pain is the only lesson worth remembering. Vex had trained 3 generations of cadets and had never once failed to reduce at least one student to tears during opening week. She took pride in her work. The annual cross-species sparring evaluation was Vex's favorite event. It was a grand affair where cadets from different species squared off against each other and, more entertainingly, against instructors from other species. It served multiple purposes: assessing combat readiness, building interspecies combat experience, and providing the senior staff with entertainment during the otherwise tedious evaluation period. The threat level scanning system added an extra layer of interest to the proceedings. Installed throughout the combat arenas, the scanners monitored both participants in any fight, measuring physiological indicators of aggression, intent to harm, and combat escalation. The system displayed color-coded readouts visible to all observers: green for baseline, yellow for elevated, orange for dangerous, and red for critical. It had been implemented after an unfortunate incident where a Krathen cadet had accidentally killed a Phoenix instructor during what was supposed to be a light sparring session. The scanners gave referees advance warning when someone was losing control. On the morning of the evaluation, the main combat arena buzzed with activity. Cadets from a dozen species lined the observation galleries, eager to watch their peers and instructors demonstrate their skills. The arena floor itself was a marvel of adaptive technology. It could shift from hard-packed dirt to soft mats to shallow water depending on which species were competing. Instructor Vex stood in the center of the arena, her 6 limbs crossed in a posture of casual superiority. She had just finished dispatching a Kroneth cadet in approximately 45 seconds, which was generous by her standards. The cadet limped away with their dignity, only slightly more injured than their thorax. "Next," Vex called, her voice carrying easily across the arena through the translation matrix embedded in the ceiling. This was when Cadet Throck made his entrance, and he made sure it was an entrance. Throck was Krathen, which meant he stood nearly 3 meters tall and massed enough to make structural engineers nervous. His species were apex predators from a high-gravity world where everything with legs wanted to eat you, and everything without legs wanted to eat you twice. Krathen were born knowing 17 different ways to kill, and they learned another 30 before adolescence just for fun. Throck had been the star of his cohort since day 1. He moved through the Academy's challenges like they were mild suggestions rather than potentially lethal tests. He had sparred with instructors from 5 different species and emerged victorious from all encounters, though victorious, in some cases, meant forced the instructor to work harder than they'd expected before ultimately winning. Still, for a cadet to push an instructor at all was noteworthy. He entered the arena with the rolling gait of a predator absolutely certain of his position in the food chain. The scanner immediately tagged him, displaying his baseline threat level in calm green. Throck's baseline, notably, was already higher than most species' combat levels. But that was Krathen physiology for you. "Instructor Vex," Throck said, inclining his head with precisely calculated respect, enough to avoid reprimand, not enough to suggest actual deference. "I request a sparring session with Instructor Chen." The arena went quiet. Not the dramatic, gasping quiet of a shocking revelation, but the awkward, uncomfortable quiet of someone announcing they'd like to wrestle a small child. Vex's antennae twitched, which was the Veltrax equivalent of raising an eyebrow. "The human instructor?" "Yes, instructor." "The one who teaches theory?" "Yes, instructor." "The theory instructor who teaches theory because she is theoretically too fragile for practical instruction?" "I believe I could learn much from the exchange instructor." Throck's tone suggested he believed he could learn how quickly he could defeat a human, which was a different kind of learning, but learning nonetheless. Several cadets in the gallery were now whispering among themselves. A few laughed. One Phoenix cadet actually pulled out a data pad, apparently ready to record what promised to be either the shortest sparring session in Academy history or the most awkward. Vex considered. On one hand, allowing a Krathen cadet to fight a human instructor Seemed like the kind of decision that would generate significant paperwork, possibly including incident reports and medical documentation. On the other hand, it might be amusing, and Vex's shift didn't end for another 6 hours. If Instructor Chen agrees, I will allow it. She's here, someone called from the gallery. Just came in. Indeed, Mara Chen had entered the observation area, presumably to watch the evaluations like several other off-duty instructors. She was of average height for a human, which meant she stood roughly at chest level to Throck when he approached her. She wore the standard academy instructor uniform, which on her looked less like combat attire and more like business casual attire that had gotten lost on its way to an office. "Instructor Chen," Throck called up to the gallery, "would you honor me with a sparring session?" Mara looked down at him for a long moment. Her expression was perfectly neutral, which several of the more observant instructors noted was somehow more unsettling than if she'd looked concerned. "You want to spar with me?" "Yes, instructor. I believe it would be educational." "Educational," Mara repeated. "For whom?" "For both of us, I hope, instructor." "I see." Mara glanced at Instructor Vex, who gestured toward the arena floor with 2 of her limbs in a "why not" motion that would definitely not appear in any official reports. Mara nodded slowly. "All right. Give me a moment." She descended to the arena floor with movements that were economical and precise. The scanner registered her immediately. Human, baseline threat level green, all indicators normal. Her readout appeared next to Throck's on the display screen surrounding the arena. The contrast was almost comical. His baseline threat level was nearly triple hers. "Standard sparring rules," Vex announced, moving to the edge of the arena. "Fight until submission, incapacitation, or my order to stop. The scanner system will monitor threat escalation. If either participant reaches critical levels, the match ends immediately. Medical teams are standing by." That last part was said with a meaningful look at Throck, who either didn't notice or didn't care. "Understood, instructor," Throck said. "Understood," Mara echoed. They moved to opposite sides of the arena. The floor shifted beneath them, settling into a neutral hard surface that favored neither species. The scanner displays pulsed once, confirming both participants were ready. "Begin," Vex said. Throck didn't waste time with posturing. He crossed the distance between them in 3 powerful strides, each one making the arena floor shudder slightly. His opening move was a straight punch with his primary right arm. Not his full strength, but certainly enough to test her reflexes and probably send her flying if it connected. Mara stepped aside. Not jumped, not rolled, not desperately scrambled. Just stepped aside. A simple lateral movement that put her exactly where Throck's fist wasn't. The displacement was minimal. Efficient. Throck's punch hit air, and his momentum carried him forward half a step. The scanner showed Throck's threat level tick up slightly. Still green, but climbing. Mara's remained flat. Throck recovered and pivoted, launching a combination. Left arm jab, right arm cross, left leg sweep. It was a solid sequence, one that would have overwhelmed most opponents with its speed and power. The Krathen were not just strong, they were fast, especially once they got moving. Mara blocked the jab with her left forearm, deflected the cross with her right, and stepped over the sweep, without apparent effort. 3 movements, economical and precise. Throck found himself facing her again, and she hadn't moved more than 2 meters from her starting position. "You're telegraphing your sweep," Mara said conversationally. "Your weight shifts to your right side about 0.3 seconds before you commit." The gallery had gone quiet again, but this time it was the focused quiet of people watching something they didn't quite understand, but suspected they should be paying attention to. Throck's threat level climbed to yellow. He circled right, and Mara turned to track him, her hands loose at her sides. He feinted left, then drove forward with a shoulder check that should have sent her tumbling. Should have. Mara rotated, used his momentum against him, and suddenly Throck was stumbling past her while she remained standing exactly where she'd been. It was like watching water flow around a stone. "You're committing too hard to your attacks," Mara observed. "Against someone your size, that works fine. Against someone smaller with better position, you're giving them everything they need." Throck's threat level hit orange. He straightened, and something shifted in his posture. The Krathen had a combat mode, a state where their already formidable abilities increased as their adrenal equivalent kicked in. His eyes, already predatory, took on a sharper focus. His breathing changed, becoming deeper and more controlled. "There we go," Vex muttered from the sidelines. Several instructors moved closer to the arena edge, suddenly interested. Throck exploded forward with genuine Krathen combat speed. He threw a flurry of strikes. Punches, elbow strikes, knee thrusts, each one capable of shattering bone. The combinations came too fast for most beings to track individually. They blurred into a continuous assault of controlled violence. Mara blocked them. Not all of them. She didn't need to block all of them. She deflected some, redirected others, and simply wasn't present for the rest. Her movements were minimal, never more than necessary. When she did block, it was precise, meeting Throck's strikes at exact angles that dissipated force rather than opposing it directly. Several of his heaviest blows she blocked one-handed, her other hand remaining loose at her side, as if she was only partly paying attention. Throck's threat level hit 85%. The scanner display flashed orange, approaching red. His assault intensified. This was no longer a sparring match in his mind. This was a problem that needed solving, and the Krathen solved problems by hitting them until they stopped being problems. A spinning back kick, one that could have dented armor plating. Mara caught it. Just reached up and caught his ankle one-handed, stopping 300 kilograms of whirling Krathen momentum dead. The impact should have shattered her arm. Her arm remained decidedly unshattered. "Control yourself," Mara said. Her voice was level, calm, the tone of someone suggesting you mind your posture in a staff meeting. She wasn't breathing hard. The scanner showed her threat level unchanged, still baseline, still green, still flat. She wasn't escalating because, from her physiological perspective, nothing was escalating. This wasn't a fight. This was a demonstration with an increasingly frantic volunteer. Throck yanked his leg free and backpedaled. His threat level hit 90%. The scanner began emitting a soft warning tone that everyone in the arena could hear. Cadets in the gallery leaned forward. Several instructors had now abandoned their conversations and were watching with undivided attention. "Instructor Chen," Vex called from the sideline. "The cadet is approaching critical levels." "I'm aware, Instructor Vex," Mara replied. "Cadet Throck, you need to regulate your state. You're escalating past optimal combat efficiency." Throck's response was to activate full Krathen Berserker mode, which was technically against sparring regulations, but was also the kind of thing that happened when you backed a predator into a corner it perceived to be a corner, even though it was actually a wide-open arena. His threat level spiked to 95%. The scanner flashed red, and alarms began sounding. He launched himself at Mara with everything he had: speed, strength, technique, and the full measure of Krathen combat fury. It was impressive. Genuinely impressive. The kind of assault that would have ended most fights in seconds. Mara moved. Not the minimal, economical movement she'd been using. Now she moved with actual speed. Not inhuman speed, not supernatural speed, just the speed of someone who had been deliberately moving very, very slowly and had decided to stop doing that. She was inside Throck's guard before he could adjust. Her left hand struck his right arm at a precise nerve cluster, temporarily deadening it. Her right hand hit his left leg at the knee, buckling it. She pivoted, used his forward momentum, and suddenly 300 kilograms of Crathen Cadet was airborne. He landed on his back with an impact that made the entire arena floor shudder. Before he could recover, Mara had immobilized his other arm and had positioned herself so that any attempt to rise would require going through her. The entire sequence took approximately 0.3 seconds. Throck's threat level immediately dropped to yellow as his combat mode deactivated due to sheer confusion. Mara's threat level, which had been flat the entire fight, suddenly spiked to 40% and then immediately dropped back to baseline, like a brief acknowledgement that yes, technically she had just engaged in combat behavior. The arena was silent. "Match concluded," Vex announced, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been surprise if Veltrak's instructors were allowed to express such things. Instructor Chen wins by immobilization. Mara released Throck and stood, offering him a hand up. He stared at it for a moment, then at her, then accepted. She pulled, and he rose, with some assistance from his own legs, naturally, but she'd clearly provided real upward force. "You're a talented fighter, Cadet Throck," Mara said, "but you rely too much on intimidation and overwhelming force. Against opponents who don't intimidate easily and who understand force dynamics, you leave yourself vulnerable. We should schedule some training sessions to work on that." Throck nodded slowly. He was fairly certain he'd just been defeated by someone who probably weighed 60 kilograms soaking wet, and his brain was still processing that information. "Yes, instructor. Thank you, instructor." The gallery erupted in conversation. Cadets were talking over each other, reviewing what they'd just seen, arguing about specific moments. Several were already pulling up the recorded footage on their datapads, slowing it down to analyze individual movements. Academy Director Vorn descended from the observation deck, where he'd apparently been watching the entire event. Vorn was Veltrak's-like instructor Vex, but older, with the kind of bearing that came from commanding fleets in actual combat rather than just training cadets. He approached Mara with a measured gait. "Instructor Chen, a word." "Of course, Director." They moved to a quieter corner of the arena, while medical staff checked on Throck, who was physically fine, but whose ego would require some recovery time. "Your personnel file lists you as a retired educator from Earth's diplomatic corps," Vorn said without preamble. "Your clearance level indicates basic combatives training, suitable for self-defense, but not advanced warfare." "That's correct, Director." "What I just witnessed suggests your file is either incomplete or inaccurate." "My file is accurate, Director. I am a retired educator. I did work for Earth's diplomatic corps." "And your combat training?" "Self-defense, as noted. Earth can be dangerous." Vorney's antennae twitched in the specific pattern that indicated he was accessing secure files through his neural link. His expression shifted slightly. "I'm now reviewing your actual service record, which required director-level clearance to access. It was redacted in the standard Academy personnel system." "Yes, Director." "You were Earth Special Operations Command for 15 standard cycles. You trained their most elite military units. You participated in what Earth refers to as high-risk peace enforcement operations in 7 different conflict zones on your homeworld." "Retired from that too, Director." You have hand-to-hand combat certifications in 14 different human martial disciplines and cross-training in non-human combat styles from 4 species. 15 disciplines now, Director. I learned Veltrax grappling last cycle. Excellent system, very efficient. Vorn stared at her. Why is someone with your qualifications teaching theory to first-cycle cadets? Mara smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Because, Director, Earth's diplomatic corps thought it would be beneficial for the galaxy to see that humans could be educators and peacekeepers. They thought sending former Special Operations personnel as cultural ambassadors would send the wrong message. So they sent former Special Operations personnel as cultural ambassadors and just didn't mention that part. The galaxy seemed quite concerned about how fragile we are, Director. We didn't want to worry anyone. Your threat level barely registered during that entire fight. The scanner measures intent to harm and physiological stress responses, Director. I never intended to harm Cadet Throck. I was teaching him. Teaching doesn't stress me. You were fighting a Krathen in full berserker mode. No, Director, I was demonstrating proper defensive positioning to a student who was temporarily having difficulty regulating his emotional state. There's a difference. Vorna's antennae did something complicated that didn't have a human equivalent, but roughly translated to, I'm too old for this nonsense. He accessed his datapad, made several notes, and then fixed Mara with a look. Effective immediately. You're reassigned to advanced combat instruction. You'll be teaching our high-tier species cadets, Krathen, Veltrax, Kronith, and others. Director, I'm quite content teaching theory. I'm sure you are, Instructor. I'm equally sure that I've been unknowingly underutilizing one of my most qualified instructors because her personnel file read like a standard diplomatic appointment. Consider this a correction to that oversight. As you say, Director. Vorn turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Instructor Chen. How many other human instructors in the Academy have similar backgrounds? I couldn't say, Director. Personnel files are confidential. That's not a denial. No, Director, it's not. Vorn left, muttering something about humans and selective transparency and how his predecessor had probably known all this and hadn't bothered mentioning it because they had a sense of humor. Several other instructors approached Mara after the director departed, suddenly finding reasons to discuss curriculum coordination and training schedules. Throck, meanwhile, sat in the medical area being examined by a Phoenix medic who kept noting that he had no injuries whatsoever, which somehow made the experience more humiliating rather than less. She didn't even hurt me, Throck said quietly. Is that not good? The medic asked. She could have. That's the point. She could have hurt me at any moment during that fight, and she chose not to. The entire time, she was just teaching. Perhaps that is more concerning than if she had hurt you, the medic observed. To have such control while showing such capability. News of the match spread through the academy at the speed of gossip, which in a facility full of young beings from a dozen species was somewhere between quickly and instantaneous. By evening meal, every cadet in the academy had seen the recording. By the next morning, enrollment requests for Instructor Chen's courses had increased by 400%. The Academy's administration spent 3 days reviewing personnel files for all human staff members. They discovered that, of the 7 human instructors employed by the Academy, 5 had similar redacted sections in their records. One had been a combat pilot who'd logged over 200 missions in Earth's atmospheric fighter corps. Another had been a wilderness survival specialist who trained military units in hostile environment operations. A third had a background so heavily redacted that even director-level clearance only revealed that they'd done various things in various places for various reasons, all classified. The humans, it seemed, had been politely declining to mention that their retirement-age cultural ambassadors were actually semi-retired, extremely competent warriors who decided teaching was a pleasant change of pace. The following semester, Mara Chen stood in front of a class of 30 advanced combat students. The class composition was notably different from her previous theory courses. More Krathen, several Veltrax, a handful of other high-tier species, and exactly 0 of the smaller, less combat-focused species who had previously made up her student body. Every single cadet sat with perfect attention. Several looked nervous. One Krathen in the front row was visibly sweating, which was difficult for Krathen to do and suggested significant anxiety. "Good morning," Mara said pleasantly. "Welcome to Advanced Interspecies Combat Applications. This course will focus on practical techniques for engaging opponents who differ significantly from you in size, strength, or capability. We'll cover leverage mechanics, momentum transfer, physiological targeting, and threat assessment." She smiled at the class, and 30 cadets sat up straighter. "Before we begin, I want to address something. Several of you have seen the recording of my sparring session with Cadet Throck last semester. Some of you are in this class specifically because of that recording. That's fine. However, I want to be clear about something." She walked to the center of the training room, her movements casual. That match was not a demonstration of human superiority or some grand statement about our species' combat prowess. Cadet Throck is a talented fighter who made several common tactical errors when facing an opponent who didn't match his expectations. Any of you could make similar mistakes. The lesson isn't that humans are secretly dangerous. The lesson is that assumptions in combat will get you killed. A Veltrax cadet in the third row raised 2 limbs. "Instructor, are humans dangerous?" "Is any species dangerous, cadet?" "Well, yes, instructor. That's why we're training." "Then yes, humans are dangerous. So are Veltrax, Krathen, Kroneth, Flenix, and every other species in this room. We're all dangerous. The question isn't whether you're dangerous. It's whether you're controlled, trained, and thinking clearly enough to apply that danger appropriately." She gestured toward the arena floor. "In this class, you're going to learn to fight opponents who are stronger than you, faster than you, or more durable than you. You're going to learn because I'm going to fight each of you, and you're going to lose. And then we're going to review why you lost and how to avoid losing that way again." The nervous Krathen in the front row raised a hand. "Instructor, will you be holding back?" Mara considered the question. "Yes, cadet, I'll be holding back. So will you. We're here to learn, not to maim each other. But I'll be holding back less than I did with Cadet Throck, because you're advanced students and you need to experience real pressure to improve. Fair enough?" The cadet nodded slowly. "Excellent. Now, let's discuss the first principle of interspecies combat. Every species has a weakness, including yours, including mine. The key is finding it before your opponent finds yours. Let's start with human weaknesses, since I'm the one you'll be fighting most often this semester." Outside the training room, Director Vorna walked past with Instructor Vex. They paused, hearing Mara's voice through the door as she cheerfully listed the various ways humans could be efficiently defeated if you knew what you were doing. "She's going to be a terror," Vex observed. "She already was," Vorn replied. "We just didn't know it. Do you think Earth did this deliberately? Sent their warriors and called them diplomats? Absolutely. And it was brilliant. By the time we realized what we were dealing with, we'd already accepted them as harmless. Now we can't backtrack without admitting we were wrong. The other species are going to figure it out eventually. They already are. 3 other Academy branches have requested information about our human instructors. 2 governments have lodged formal inquiries about human military capabilities. And Earth just keeps sending us more cultural ambassadors. What did the latest one's file say? Vorn pulled up his datapad. Retired teacher, background in conflict resolution and youth education. And the redacted section? 15 cycles in Earth's Marine Corps, specialized in hostile environment assault operations, decorated for valor in 7 separate engagements. Vex's antennae performed the equivalent of a tired sigh. Of course. They continued down the corridor, leaving Mara Chen to teach her class. Behind them, the scanner system mounted in the training room registered 31 beings. 30 cadets showing elevated stress responses, and 1 instructor whose baseline remained perfectly, unsettlingly calm. In the Academy's technical department, 3 floors down, a team of engineers was still trying to recalibrate the scanner system. It kept producing anomalous readings around human instructors. Not because it was malfunctioning, but because human threat assessment apparently worked on a completely different paradigm than every other species. Humans could be simultaneously non-threatening and extremely dangerous, could fight without elevated stress responses, and could harm without intent to harm. The lead engineer, a Chronith named Vex, who was no relation to Instructor Vex despite the name coincidence, stared at the latest diagnostic readout and wondered if perhaps the scanner was working perfectly fine. And it was everyone's understanding of threat assessment that needed recalibrating. Outside the Academy, on the orbital station that served as the primary hub for the sector, news of Earth's diplomatic instructors was spreading. Some species found it amusing. Some found it concerning. A few found it tactically brilliant. One particular species, the Hrothak, who had been considering whether the seemingly weak humans might make easy targets for expansion, quietly revised their assessment and decided that perhaps they had pressing business in a completely different part of the galaxy. Back in the training room, Mara Chen was demonstrating proper joint lock technique on a volunteer Veltrax cadet. The cadet was trying very hard and discovering that trying very hard wasn't actually helping. The rest of the class watched with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for studying predators through reinforced glass. The key, Mara explained, maintaining the lock effortlessly, is not strength. It's position and leverage. Notice how I'm not opposing his strength directly. I'm redirecting it into a position where strength doesn't matter. Force multiplied by position equals control. Remember that. She released the cadet, who immediately began moving their arm in circles to verify it still worked properly. Now, everyone pair up. I want you practicing this on each other for the next hour. I'll be circulating to correct form. And remember, control yourselves. We're learning, not competing. As the cadets paired off and began their exercises, Mara walked among them, offering corrections, adjustments, and the occasional demonstration. Her movements were patient, methodical, educational. The scanner on the wall registered her as green, baseline, non-threatening. It wasn't wrong, exactly. She wasn't threatening anyone. She was just teaching them exactly how dangerous everything could be if you understood it properly. Which, when you thought about it, might have been the most dangerous thing of all.